I signed my name where I was told to sign, because that's what you do when family asks for help. It was a Tuesday morning, just after 9, and my kitchen clock was ticking too loud. The mail was still unopened on the counter. My phone buzzed once, then stopped. I noticed the envelope didn't have my handwriting on it. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. Everything I believed about who was protecting me was already starting to fall apart. I signed my name because the woman across the desk slid the paper toward me and said, "This is just a formality." She didn't look up when she said it. She was tapping something into her computer, chewing gum, one leg crossed over the other. It was the kind of office where the lights are too bright and the chairs are meant to keep you from staying too long. Beige walls, a fake plant in the corner with dust on its leaves, a framed poster about dignity and aging that had clearly been there for years. I used my own pen. I always carry one. Black ink, medium tip. The pen felt heavier than usual in my hand, but that might have been my wrist. Arthritis comes and goes. I signed where the yellow sticky note told me to sign, then slid the paper back toward her. She said, "Great," like we'd just finished ordering coffee. That was the first thing that bothered me. Not alarmed me, just bothered me. I'm 68 years old. I live alone in a small rambler outside Columbus, Ohio. 3 bedrooms, one of which I turned into a sewing room after my husband died. I've lived in this house for 26 years. I paid off the mortgage 5 years ago. I still mow my own lawn. I shovel my own driveway unless the snow gets too heavy, and then my neighbor's teenage son does it for $20 and a bottle of Gatorade. I don't sign things blindly. For 34 years, I worked as a human resources manager for a regional manufacturing company. I hired people. I fired people. I handled grievances, lawsuits, workers' comp claims, performance reviews, and retirement packages. I spent my career reading fine print, asking uncomfortable questions, and noticing what people didn't say out loud. So when someone tells me this is just a formality, my instinct is to read every word twice. But that morning, I didn't, because the person who had set up the appointment was my younger sister, Elaine. Elaine is 62. She lives 20 minutes away in a newer development with sidewalks that all look the same and houses that were built too fast. We share a father, not a mother. We didn't grow up together full-time, but we've been in each other's lives long enough to call it family without hesitation. After my husband passed, she was the one who brought casseroles. She drove me to my colonoscopy. She sat in my kitchen and drank tea that went cold while I talked myself in circles about whether I should sell the house. When Elaine said, "I think you should come with me to this meeting," I didn't think she meant harm. She framed it as concern. That's what people do when they want you to lower your guard. "It's just a review," she told me on the phone. "Routine stuff. Medicare changes, long-term planning. You know how confusing that paperwork can be." I do know. I've filled it out for other people. I've explained it to employees half my age. But I went anyway. The office was part of a medical complex I'd driven past dozens of times without noticing. Low brick building, plenty of parking, a glass door with a decal listing 5 different services in small, serious font. Geriatric assessment, care coordination, cognitive wellness, family support services, legal referrals. I remember thinking that the word family was doing a lot of work on that door. Elaine met me in the parking lot. She hugged me a little too tightly and said, "I'm really glad you're doing this." Her perfume was the same one she's worn for years, something floral and sharp. She kept her purse on her shoulder even inside, like she didn't plan to stay long. We checked in. I gave my name. The receptionist smiled and asked for my date of birth, then slid a clipboard toward me. Elaine said. She already filled those out and handed over a folder I hadn't seen before. That was the second thing that bothered me. Inside the office, the woman with the gum explained things in a voice that was calm, practiced, and oddly impersonal. She talked about baseline evaluations and preventive safeguards. She said words like capacity and continuity. She never once asked me how I felt. At one point, she said, "Your sister expressed some concerns." Elaine nodded quickly. Too quickly. "Just little things," she said. Nothing serious. Forgetfulness, stress. You know how it is at this age. This age. I looked at my hands resting on my lap. They were steady. My nails were trimmed. No shaking. No confusion. The woman turned the computer screen slightly so I could see it. There was my name at the top, my address, my social security number, my employment history. Some of it was accurate, some of it was incomplete. She asked me what day it was. I told her. She asked me who the current president was. I answered. She asked me to remember 3 words and repeat them later. I did. All the while, Elaine sat very still, hands folded, eyes on the desk. She didn't look at me once. When the papers came out, they were already clipped together. That's just an acknowledgement, the woman said, tapping the page. It allows us to keep everything on file, if we ever need to coordinate care or communicate with family. Which family? I asked. Elaine laughed softly. Me, she said. It's just me. I hesitated, just long enough to feel it in my chest. That tightening, that internal pause I've learned not to ignore. Then I signed, because the room felt like it was waiting for me to, because Elaine was watching now, because saying no, suddenly, would have required an explanation I didn't yet have. Afterward, Elaine insisted on lunch. We went to a diner I've eaten at for years, same vinyl booths, same chipped mugs. She ordered for both of us without asking, like she used to when we were younger. Turkey club, fries, no pickles. She talked too much. About traffic, about her HOA, about how her knees were acting up. I listened and nodded and watched the condensation slide down my water glass. At one point, she said, "This is just to make things easier down the road." I said, "Easier for who?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. For everyone. When I got home, the house felt the same. Quiet. Familiar. The clock over the stove was 5 minutes fast, like it's always been. My mail was stacked neatly on the counter where I'd left it that morning. I sorted it by habit. Grocery store flyer. Utility bill. A brown envelope from an insurance company I didn't recognize. I opened that one first. Inside was a letter thanking me for my recent update and confirming that future correspondence would include my designated family contact. Elaine's name was spelled wrong. I stood there longer than I meant to, the paper held loosely in my hand. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Outside, someone was mowing their lawn. It wasn't fear I felt then. It was something quieter, the unmistakable sense that a door had been opened without my permission, and whatever I thought I understood about who was standing on my side of it was no longer true. The next morning, I woke up at 5:42 a.m., the way I usually do, without an alarm. My bladder has better timing than any clock I've ever owned. I shuffled down the hall, flipped on the bathroom light, brushed my teeth, and studied my face in the mirror while the coffee maker warmed up in the kitchen. Nothing looked different. That should have reassured me. Instead, it irritated me. I stood there longer than usual, leaning closer, checking for signs I might have missed. Drooping eyelid, uneven pupils, anything that would explain why my sister had decided to escort me into an office with the words cognitive wellness on the door. I looked fine. Tired, maybe. 68 years of fine lines and gray roots that needed touching up, but fine. I poured coffee into my favorite mug, the one with the chipped rim I refused to throw away, and carried it to the kitchen table. The mail from the day before sat in a neat stack where I'd left it. I slid the insurance letter out again and reread it slowly, like I used to reread employee handbooks when something didn't sit right. Designated family contact. Those words had weight, legal weight, administrative weight. The kind that doesn't make noise when it lands but still changes things. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Then I did something I hadn't planned on doing. I opened my laptop. I'm not a paranoid person. I don't Google symptoms or assume the worst, but I've learned over the years that when something feels off, it usually is. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to matter. I typed the name of the medical group into the search bar. The website was polished, Photos of smiling older adults walking in parks, laughing with adult children, holding hands with grandchildren. Phrases like peace of mind and support for the whole family floated across the screen. I clicked on the section labeled Services. There it was, halfway down the page, written in neutral, professional language. Capacity assessments may be initiated at the request of a family member or care partner. Care partner. I took another sip of coffee. It had gone lukewarm. I closed the laptop and told myself I was reading too much into it. Elaine hadn't done anything malicious. She worried. That was her nature. Ever since our father died, she'd taken it upon herself to be the organizer, the planner, the one who made sure things were handled. After my husband passed, she'd asked me 3 separate times if I wanted her to help manage my finances. Each time, I'd said no. Politely, firmly. She dropped it, or so I thought. By mid-morning, I was restless. I vacuumed the living room even though it didn't need it. I watered the plants. I reorganized the spice rack. When that didn't help, I grabbed my keys and drove to the grocery store, even though I'd gone the day before. The parking lot was busy. A woman about my age struggled with a cart that had a mind of its own. A young man loaded cases of soda into the back of an SUV while talking loudly on his phone. Everything was normal, ordinary. I walked the aisles slowly, picking up items I didn't need, putting them back. At the checkout, the cashier asked me if I wanted to sign up for the store's senior discount program. I said no. She hesitated, then said, "You sure? You qualify." "I know," I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. When I got home, my phone buzzed on the counter. Elaine's name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hey," she said, bright and casual. "Just checking in. How are you feeling today?" "Fine," I said. Why wouldn't I be? A pause. Small, but there. "Oh, you know," she said. "After yesterday, I just wanted to make sure you weren't overwhelmed." "I wasn't," I said. "You didn't mention you'd already filled out paperwork." Another pause. Longer this time. "I was just helping," she said. "They asked some preliminary questions over the phone. It saved time." "What questions?" I asked. "Oh, basic stuff," she said quickly. "Address, emergency contacts, medical history." "Did you tell them I was forgetful?" I asked. She laughed, a little too lightly. "Of course not. Don't be ridiculous." I didn't argue. I didn't push. I just said, "Okay," and changed the subject. We talked about nothing for a few more minutes, then hung up. I stood in my kitchen after the call ended, phone still in my hand, staring at the spot on the wall where my husband used to lean while he waited for coffee. The paint there was slightly darker from years of contact. I'd never bothered to repaint it. That afternoon, I pulled out the filing cabinet in the hall closet, the one labeled personal. Inside were folders I hadn't opened in years, tax returns, insurance policies, retirement statements, the quiet evidence of a life lived independently. Everything was in order, which made the unease worse, because in my experience, the most effective takeovers don't start with chaos. They start with concern, with offers to help, with paperwork done for your own good. 8:02. Around 4 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. It was my neighbor, Carol, holding a plate of brownies wrapped in foil. "I made too many," she said. "Thought you might want some." I thanked her and invited her in. We sat at the table, eating brownies that were still warm. She told me about her daughter's new job. I listened and nodded and smiled in the right places. At one point, she said, "Elaine stopped by yesterday." My hand stilled around my coffee mug. "She did?" "Yes," Carol said, "just briefly. She asked if I'd noticed anything different about you lately." "Different how?" Carol frowned. She didn't say. "Just asked if you seemed confused sometimes, or forgetful." "And what did you say?" I asked. "That you're sharper than most people I know," Carol said without hesitation. "I told her you helped me fill out my passport renewal last month." I thanked her again when she left. After the door closed, I leaned my forehead against it for a moment, feeling the cool wood through my skin. So that was it. Not an emergency. Not a crisis. A campaign. That evening, I made myself dinner and ate it standing up at the counter, even though I usually sit. The television was on in the background, but I wasn't watching it. My mind kept circling the same thought, over and over. Elaine wasn't trying to steal from me. She was trying to step in front of me. And the most unsettling part wasn't the realization itself. It was how calmly she was doing it, how reasonable it all sounded on the surface, how easy it would be for someone else, someone official, someone with a badge or a degree to believe her. I washed my plate, dried it, and put it away. Then I walked down the hall and stood in the doorway of my sewing room, fabric bins neatly stacked, half-finished quilt draped over the chair, my life reduced to quiet proof. I picked up my phone and opened my contacts. Elaine's name sat there, unchanged. I didn't delete it. I didn't block her. I just stared at it for a long time, understanding something I hadn't understood before. This wasn't about whether I was capable. It was about who would be believed when someone decided I wasn't. 2 days later, the call came while I was in the middle of folding laundry. I remember that detail clearly because I had just finished matching socks, a task I take unreasonable pride in. 34 years of marriage trains you to notice patterns, and socks, at least, still behaved logically. I had one foot propped on the dryer door, a basket balanced on my hip, when my phone buzzed on the counter behind me. Unknown number. I let it buzz twice before answering. Old habit from work. If it's important, they'll wait. "Mrs. Hart?" a man asked. His voice was polite, professional, and already tired. "Yes," I said. "This is Mark Reynolds calling from Franklin County Adult Services. I'm following up on a referral that came in earlier this week." Referral. The word landed softly, but it stayed. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, setting the basket down. "There was a concern raised about your well-being," he said. "Nothing urgent. Just a request to check in, make sure you have adequate support." I leaned back against the counter and crossed my arms. What kind of concern? Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear papers shuffling on his end. "General concerns," he said carefully. "Memory, decision-making, stress levels." "Who raised them?" I asked. "I'm not at liberty to disclose that," he said. "But it was a family member." "Of course it was." "I see," I said. My voice sounded steady, even to my own ears. "And what does check-in mean, exactly?" "Well," he said, "we usually start with a home visit, just a conversation. We assess whether any services are needed. It's preventative. Preventative. Another word that sounds harmless until it isn't." "I'm not interested," I said. He cleared his throat. "You're within your rights to decline, Mrs. Hart, but I should let you know that a refusal is noted in the file." "There's already a file?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "From the referral. Off." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, just long enough to count to 3. "When would you be proposing this visit?" I asked. "Thursday afternoon," he said quickly, like he'd already penciled it in. "Around 2? "I'll think about it," I said. "You can call me back tomorrow." "That's fine," he said. "I'll make a note." When the call ended, the house felt different. Not unsafe, not invaded, just documented. I finished folding the laundry, though my hands moved more slowly now. Each shirt went into its pile, each towel folded square. The rhythm helped, but it didn't erase the fact that someone, somewhere, had written my name next to the words memory concerns. That evening, Elaine called again. "I heard from Adult Services today," I said before she could say hello. Silence. Then, "Oh," she said. "Already?" "Already what?" I asked. "Well," she said, "I figured it might take a week or 2. I gripped the phone a little tighter. "So you did call them. There is a watcher." "I didn't call them," she said quickly. "I just mentioned a few things to my doctor. He said it might be wise to loop them in, just to be safe." "Safe for who?" I asked. "For you," she said, her voice softening. You live alone. What if something happens and no one knows? Something like what? I asked. Another pause. Why are you being defensive? She asked. I'm trying to help. I didn't ask for help, I said. That's the problem, she said gently. You never do. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The shape of it was becoming clear now, sharp edges and all. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table long after the sun went down. I didn't turn on any lights. The dark felt appropriate. In my career, I'd sat across from employees who insisted they were fine while everything around them suggested otherwise. I'd been trained to listen not just to words, but to patterns, escalations, paper trails. This was one of those. The next morning, I called my former colleague, Janet. We'd worked together for years before she retired and moved to Cincinnati. She answered on the second ring. You sound serious, she said after I explained. I am, I said. Hypothetically, what happens if someone questions an older adult's capacity without their consent? She sighed. Hypothetically? It depends how far it goes. Once there's a referral, agencies start covering themselves. Documentation multiplies. Even if nothing comes of it, the record exists. And if the person is perfectly capable? I asked. That helps, she said, but it doesn't make it disappear. After the call, I sat very still. Then I did something else I hadn't planned to do. I pulled out my calendar, not the digital one, the paper one I keep on the wall by the fridge. I flipped back 6 months and started marking dates, appointments, conversations, visits from Elaine. Patterns emerged quickly when I looked for them. The dinner where she'd asked about my will. The time she'd offered to simplify my bills. The afternoon she'd insisted on driving me to a routine doctor's appointment and stayed in the room the whole time. None of it had seemed alarming on its own. Together, it told a story. On Thursday morning, Mark Reynolds called back. I won't be needing a visit, I told him. But I'd like a copy of whatever documentation you have. There was a pause. You're entitled to request records, he said. I can send you the forms. Please do, I said. When the email arrived an hour later, I printed it out and placed it neatly on the table. 6 pages, dense language, boxes to check, a process. This was no longer about hurt feelings or family dynamics. This was administrative. That afternoon, Elaine stopped by unannounced. She stood in my doorway, purse clutched to her chest, eyes scanning the living room like she was seeing it for the first time. I was worried, she said. You didn't call me back. I was busy, I said. She stepped inside anyway. I just want to make sure you're okay. I am, I said, but I won't be if you keep speaking for me. Her mouth tightened. You're overreacting. No, I said quietly. I'm responding. She looked at me then, really looked, and for a split second, something flickered across her face. Not guilt, calculation. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she said. That's interesting, I said, because from where I'm standing, you've already made it very complicated. She left soon after, saying she had errands to run. I locked the door behind her and leaned against it, listening to her car pull away. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a process. And now that it had started, the only real question left was whether I would remain the subject of it or take back control before it decided for me. By Friday, the house felt smaller, not physically. The walls hadn't moved, the ceilings hadn't dropped, but the air had changed. It carried weight now, like a room where people have been whispering after you leave. I woke up early again, before 6, and lay in bed listening to the furnace kick on and off. The sound was familiar, comforting, but it didn't settle me the way it usually did. My mind kept returning to the same image. My name typed neatly into a system I couldn't see, followed by notes I didn't write. After breakfast, I sat at the kitchen table with my checkbook open in front of me. Even though I didn't need to write any checks, the numbers still made sense. Everything balanced. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that none of this was happening loudly. No one had accused me of anything outright. No one had said I was incapable or unfit or confused. They were just concerned. And concern, I was learning, could move faster than truth if you let it. Around 10, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Elaine. "Mrs. Hart," a woman said, her voice warm in a way that felt practiced. "This is Denise Miller. I'm a care coordinator with North Valley Medical Group. I'm calling to introduce myself." "Introduce yourself to what?" I asked. "To you," she said lightly. "Your sister Elaine listed me as a point of contact. She thought it might be helpful for us to connect." I closed my eyes. "And why would we need to connect?" I asked. "Well," Denise said, "Elaine mentioned that you've been under some stress lately. We like to be proactive, make sure everyone has the support they need." There it was again. Everyone. "I haven't consented to anything," I said. "Oh," she said quickly. "Of course. This is just informational. No action without your approval." "Then remove my sister as a contact," I said, effective immediately. A pause. Just a beat too long. "I can note your request," Denise said. "But because Elaine is listed as family support, certain communications are not authorized by me," I said. Another pause. I imagined her typing. "I'll escalate that," she said. "Someone will follow up." When the call ended, I didn't sit down. I walked from room to room, touching things. The back of the couch, the doorframe where I'd marked my grandson's height years ago, back when Elaine still brought him over on Sundays. The bookshelf filled with binders from my HR days, their labels faded but legible. I had built my life on documentation. And now, documentation was being used against me. At noon, my friend Carol knocked again. This time she didn't have brownies. "Are you okay?" she asked as soon as I opened the door. Elaine stopped by again. "She asked if you'd been confused when you talked last week." I didn't invite Carol in. I stepped outside instead and closed the door behind me. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "The truth," Carol said. "That you corrected me when I got your birthday wrong. That you helped me file an appeal with the DMV. That you remind me when trash day changes." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "She didn't like that," Carol added. "She said sometimes people seem fine until they aren't." I quote. I nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me." Carol hesitated. "You know I'd tell you if I was worried, right?" "I know," I said, and I meant it. After she left, I went back inside and made a list. Not an emotional list, not a list of grievances, just facts. Who had called, when, what they said, who they referenced. I wrote in block letters, the way I used to, when documenting workplace incidents. No adjectives, no assumptions. The list filled one page, then another. By mid-afternoon, I had a clearer picture than I'd had all week. Elaine wasn't acting alone. She was positioning herself as the reasonable center of a growing circle of professionals, doctors, coordinators, agencies. All of them had one thing in common. They had spoken to her first. That evening, Elaine texted me. "You don't have to shut me out. I'm on your side." I stared at the message for a long time before replying, then stopped speaking for me. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "You're taking this personally," she finally wrote. "This is just how things work at our age." Our age. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out a folder from the filing cabinet and slid my advance directive onto the table. It was dated, notarized, and explicit. It named no one but myself. It had seemed sufficient when I signed it years ago. Now, I wasn't so sure. At 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I checked through the peephole before opening it. A man in his 40s stood on the porch, holding a clipboard. Polo shirt, khakis, no badge. "Mrs. Hart?" he asked when I opened the door a crack. "Yes. I'm with a local advocacy group," he said. "We work with families to make sure seniors are protected." "Protected from what?" I asked. He smiled sympathetically. "From falling through the cracks." "Who sent you?" I asked. "There was a referral," he said, smoothly. "Just thought I'd stop by, introduce myself." "Hive." "I'm not interested," I said. He glanced at his clipboard. It would only take a few minutes. "No," I said, and closed the door. I locked it. Then I locked it again. I stood there in the quiet hallway, my heart steady, my hands not shaking at all. This wasn't panic. It was clarity. Elaine had crossed a line, but she'd done it in a way that made her look responsible, even admirable. She hadn't attacked me. She'd reframed me. And once that frame was in place, everything I said could be interpreted through it. I went back to the kitchen and sat down. The list lay in front of me. Calls, names, dates. I added one more line at the bottom. Pattern established. I didn't know yet what I was going to do. I didn't have a dramatic plan. I wasn't angry enough for that, but I understood something essential now. This wasn't about convincing Elaine to stop. It was about making sure she no longer had the authority to continue. And that meant I would have to act before concern hardened into conclusion, before paperwork became precedent, and before someone else decided, on my behalf, that my life required management. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and the low, clean light that comes after a cold front. I noticed it because I always do. I opened the blinds in the living room and stood there for a moment, watching frost melt off the neighbor's car. The world was still doing what it always did. That mattered to me more than it probably should have. I didn't call anyone that day. I didn't answer emails. I didn't check my voicemail. I made a deliberate decision to spend the morning inside my own head, without anyone else narrating it for me. I cleaned the kitchen slowly, not because it was dirty, but because it gave my hands something to do while my mind worked. I wiped the counters. I organized the drawer where I keep batteries and rubber bands. I sharpened the pencils in the cup by the phone, even though I rarely use pencils anymore. What I didn't do was rehearse arguments. That would have been a waste of time. Arguments assume the other person is listening. Elaine wasn't listening. She was documenting. So instead, I observed. I replayed the past year, not emotionally, but structurally. Conversations, timing, the order in which things had happened. I asked myself the same questions I used to ask when two employees came into my office with competing versions of the same story. Who benefited? Who initiated contact? Who escalated? And how quietly? Elaine had always framed her involvement as a response. She was never the one doing anything. She was reacting, helping, looping people in, following advice. That was the tell. At 11, my phone buzzed. A text from Elaine. "Just checking in. Haven't heard from you." I left it unread. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't respond. Silence, I'd learned, often makes people show their real priorities. An hour later, another text. "Carol said you seemed upset yesterday. I hope you're okay." Carol hadn't said that. I knew she hadn't. I wrote that down on my legal pad. Statement attributed to third party. Unverified. I made myself lunch soup from a can, crackers on a plate, and ate it standing up again. I noticed that detail too. Standing made me feel less like I was settling into something. In the afternoon, I took a walk around the block. I waved to people I recognized. I stopped to pet a dog tied up outside the coffee shop. The owner smiled at me and said, "She's friendly." The dog leaned into my leg like she believed it. When I got home, there was a voicemail waiting, not from Elaine. It was from my bank. "Mrs. Hart," the message said. "This is a courtesy call to confirm recent inquiries about account access. Please return our call at your convenience." End quote. I didn't have to sit down to feel it this time. I just stood there in the hallway, phone in my hand, staring at the framed photo of my husband and me at the lake. He was squinting into the sun. I remembered that day clearly. He'd forgotten the cooler in the car and refused to go back for it. Account access. That wasn't a casual phrase. I called the bank back immediately. After navigating the menu, I was connected to a woman named Teresa. Her voice was efficient but kind, the way customer service voices often are when they're about to deliver something unpleasant. "Can you confirm your identity for me?" she asked. I did, without hesitation. She paused. "Thank you. I see here that someone called earlier this week asking about adding an authorized contact to your accounts. Who? I asked. There's a note that it was a family member, she said. Your sister, Elaine Hart. I closed my eyes. And did you add her? No, Teresa said quickly. Not without your consent. We flagged the inquiry instead. That's why I'm calling. Did she say why she wanted access? I asked. Teresa hesitated. She expressed concern about your ability to manage finances independently. There it was again. The same phrasing. Different institution. I want a copy of that note, I said. I can request it, Teresa said. It may take a few days. That's fine, I said. Also, I want to add a verbal password to my account, effective immediately. Of course, she said. What would you like it to be? I gave her one. Not something sentimental, not a name. Just a word I wouldn't forget and no one else would guess. When the call ended, I sat down for the first time all day. The pattern was no longer subtle. Elaine wasn't reacting to anything I'd done. She was laying groundwork, quietly, methodically, across multiple systems, health, social services, financial institutions, always just enough to raise a flag, never enough to look aggressive. If I hadn't spent my career inside organizations, I might have missed it, but I hadn't. That evening, Elaine came by again. I hadn't invited her. She didn't knock. She rang the bell twice, then knocked anyway. I opened the door and stayed in the doorway. You didn't answer your phone, she said, breathless. I was worried. I know, I said. She looked past me into the house. Have you been eating? Yes. Sleeping? Yes. Taking your medication? Yes. Her eyes flicked down, then back up, like she was checking boxes. I spoke to your bank today, I said calmly. She froze. Just for a second. I didn't do anything, she said quickly. I just asked a question. You asked whether I was capable, I said. She shook her head. I asked what options were available. There's a difference. Not to them, I said. She sighed and rubbed her temples. Why are you making me out to be the villain here? I'm not, I said. I'm observing your behavior. That's unfair, she snapped. I'm the only one looking out for you. That's also not true, I said, and you know it. Her face changed then. The softness dropped away. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was irritation. You've always been stubborn, she said. Dad used to say that. I remember, I said. He also said I was competent. She took a step forward. I didn't move. This is what happens when people get older, she said. They don't see the decline. And this is what happens when people think they're entitled to intervene, I said. They stop asking. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. For a moment, we just stood there, sisters in a doorway, separated by something that hadn't existed before. I'm going to continue doing what I think is best, she said finally. I know, I said. She left without saying goodbye. After the door closed, I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I went back to the kitchen table, flipped to a clean page on my legal pad, and wrote one sentence. She will not stop on her own. Seeing it written down didn't frighten me. It clarified things. Up until now, I had been reacting, gathering information, confirming my instincts, watching the shape of the problem emerge. That phase was over. If Elaine was committed to building a case about me, then I needed to do something she hadn't anticipated. I needed to stop being a subject and start becoming a record. Sunday morning, I drove to the public library, not because I needed books, because libraries are quiet in a way that doesn't feel invasive. No one asks why you're there. No one assumes you need help unless you ask for it. You sit at a table, open a folder, and the world leaves you alone. I chose a seat near the window. The sunlight was strong enough to read by without the overhead lights. I laid out what I'd brought with me, my legal pad, a folder with printed emails, and the forms adult services had sent over. I didn't rush. That was important. Rushing makes you sloppy. Sloppy gives other people leverage. I started with the records request forms, They were written in language that pretended to be neutral but wasn't. Words like relevant, necessary, at the discretion of the agency. I filled them out carefully, my handwriting neat, consistent. I checked boxes. I initialed where required. I made a photocopy at the self-service machine and stapled it to my copy. Then I waited. While I waited, I thought about my sister. Not emotionally, practically. Elaine wasn't cruel. That was the part people would miss. She wasn't shouting, threatening, or demanding anything outright. She was doing something far more effective. She was narrating me. In my career, I'd seen this before, not with families, but with companies. When leadership wants someone gone without the mess of a termination, they start building a file. Attendance concerns, fit issues, culture mismatches, nothing that stands alone, everything that adds up. That's what Elaine was doing. And she was doing it with systems that assume good intentions. On Tuesday afternoon, the first envelope arrived. It was thicker than I expected. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table, next to my coffee mug. I didn't open it right away. I took off my coat. I washed my hands. I sat down. Inside were copies of notes from adult services, intake summaries, a referral form. My name typed cleanly at the top of each page. I read them slowly. Caller expressed concern regarding subjects' increasing isolation. Reports of stress-related forgetfulness. Family member willing to serve as point of contact and assist with decision-making. I recognized the phrasing. It wasn't Elaine's voice. It was Elaine translated into professional language. There were no outright lies. That was the clever part. Isolation. I lived alone. Stress. I was widowed. Forgetfulness. Undefined. Each line was technically defensible. Together, they painted a picture I didn't recognize. I turned the page. There it was. A timeline. Dates. Touch points. A list of informal observations reported over several months. I could see exactly when Elaine's concern had shifted from private worry to official narrative. It started right after I declined to add her to my financial accounts. Right after I updated my will without mentioning it to her. Right after I said no. I sat back in my chair and let that settle. This wasn't about my safety. It was about my autonomy. 2 days later, the banknote arrived. It was brief, clinical, a record of Elaine's inquiry, a summary of her stated concern, a notation that no changes had been made due to lack of authorization. But what mattered wasn't what they hadn't done. It was what they'd written down. I lined up the documents on the table. Adult services, bank, medical group, different institutions, same language. Concern, capacity, support. I felt something then. Not fear, not anger, but a kind of grim respect. Elaine had been thorough. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since my husband died. I called an attorney, not a family friend, not someone Elaine knew. I searched online and chose a woman whose practice focused on elder law and administrative advocacy. Her name was Rebecca Torres. Her office was downtown, in a building with bad parking and good reviews. When she answered, I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. I need help correcting a record, I said, and preventing it from being used against me. There was a pause. Come in tomorrow, she said. Bring everything. Eva Sender. Her office smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner. There were no inspirational posters, just shelves of binders and a large desk covered in neatly stacked files. Rebecca didn't interrupt while I spoke. She didn't reassure me prematurely. She listened, occasionally jotting down notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. You're not in trouble, she said, but you're right to be concerned. Because? I asked. Because once this kind of narrative exists, she said, tapping the folder, it tends to circulate. Quietly, people rely on it without verifying it. What can I do? I asked. You document back, she said. You assert your voice, in writing through proper channels, and you limit access. Access to what? I asked. To you, she said. She explained the steps. Formal rebuttals. Requests for correction, Clear statements of capacity, supported by independent evaluations, not ones arranged by family. "And your sister?" I asked. Rebecca's expression didn't change. "She doesn't disappear," she said, "but she loses unilateral influence." When I left her office, I felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. This was work, real work, the kind I'd done my whole life. At home, I made myself dinner and ate at the table this time. I needed the grounding, the chair under me, the weight of the fork in my hand. Elaine texted that night. "You've been distant. I hope you're not shutting me out." I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I wrote, "I'm handling things." She didn't reply. The next week was consumed by paperwork. I wrote statements, clear, factual, unemotional. I attached documentation. I requested amendments, corrections, addendums. I did not accuse. I clarified. Each envelope I mailed felt like a small reclaiming, not dramatic, just precise. On Friday afternoon, another envelope arrived. This one from the medical group. Inside was a revised note. "Patient denies cognitive concerns. No evidence of impairment observed. Family reports noted but unsubstantiated." It wasn't an apology, but it was a shift. That night, Elaine called. Her voice was tight. "Did you talk to a lawyer?" "Yes," I said. "You didn't need to do that," she said. "This could have been handled privately." I welled. "It was already public," I said. "Just not to me." She was quiet. "You're making me look bad," she said finally. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. "I'm making myself visible," I said. "There's a difference." She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there for a while, phone in my lap, thinking about how easily concern becomes control when no one pushes back. Elaine hadn't anticipated this part. She hadn't expected me to respond in writing, to involve systems the way she had, to speak the language she'd been using, but more accurately. She had thought she was ahead, but now there was a record, not of decline, of resistance. And once resistance is documented, it changes everything. The night after Elaine hung up on me, I didn't sleep. Not in the restless, tossing way people imagine when they say that. I slept in pieces, 20 minutes here, 40 there. Each time I woke, my mind picked up exactly where it had left off, like a machine that had never powered down. At some point after midnight, I got out of bed and went to the kitchen. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter, staring at the dark window above the sink. My reflection hovered there, faint and distorted. I looked like someone else, someone watching. This was the part no one ever warns you about. Not the paperwork, not the meetings, not even the betrayal, once you name it. It's the quiet afterward, when the noise stops and you're left alone with the question you've been avoiding. How did it get this far? I thought back to my husband's funeral, 7 years earlier. Elaine had stood beside me the whole day, handing me tissues, steering people gently away when I needed space. I'd been grateful, deeply so. At the time, it felt like love, like solidarity. I wondered now if that had been the first time she'd learned how easily I stepped aside when someone else took charge. I went back to bed sometime around 3. When I woke again, the clock read 6:18 a.m. Dawn was just starting to bleed into the sky. I lay there, fully awake, listening to the house, pipes ticking, a car passing outside. Somewhere, a dog barking. At 8, Elaine texted, "We need to talk." I didn't respond. Instead, I made breakfast, eggs, toast. I sat at the table and ate slowly, deliberately. I forced myself to notice the taste of the coffee, the way the steam curled up from the mug. I needed to stay in my body. If I let my thoughts run ahead, they'd drag me into places that weren't useful yet. By mid-morning, I felt something shift. Not resolve, not anger, acceptance. Elaine was never going to see this the way I did. That realization settled in quietly, without drama. I stopped imagining the conversation where she'd finally understand, where she'd apologize, where we'd repair something essential. That conversation existed only in my head. In reality, Elaine believed she was right. And people who believe they're right don't stop because you ask nicely. Around noon, I pulled out a box from the top shelf of the hall closet. Inside were things I hadn't touched since my husband died. Old photos, cards, documents I'd saved without knowing why. At the bottom of the box was a notebook. It was one of those cheap spiral-bound ones, the kind you buy in a pack of 3. The cover was bent, the edges soft from use. I recognized it immediately. My husband's handwriting filled the first few pages. He'd kept it during the last year of his life, when his health started to slip in small, manageable ways. He wasn't dying then. Not yet. He was just changing, forgetting appointments, losing track of conversations. Nothing alarming on its own. He'd written things down because he wanted proof. For himself. Felt foggy this morning. Cleared by noon. Forgot name of neighbor's dog. Remembered later. Doctor says stress. I ran my fingers over the ink, faded but still legible. Halfway through the notebook, the handwriting changed. It became sharper, more deliberate. Elaine says I should let her handle the bills for a while. Says it's temporary. I closed the notebook. I had never seen this before. My husband had never mentioned it. Or maybe he had, and I hadn't understood the significance at the time. Grief has a way of blurring details. I sat there for a long time, the notebook resting on my lap. So this wasn't new. That realization hit harder than anything else had so far. Not because it made Elaine seem more dangerous, but because it reframed the past. It suggested a pattern I'd been too busy surviving to notice. That afternoon, I went for another walk. I needed movement, air, something that reminded me I wasn't trapped inside a file or a narrative. I walked farther than usual, past streets I didn't normally go down. The houses grew newer, larger. People my age lived there too, mowing lawns, washing cars, going about their business. No one was being assessed. No one was being supported. They were just living. When I got home, there was an email waiting from Adult Services. We have updated your file per your recent submissions. Please note that while family concerns remain on record, your statement has been added and will be considered in any future review. Considered. I read that sentence 3 times. This was the danger of bureaucratic language. It never says yes. It never says no. It leaves room. I forwarded the email to Rebecca. Her reply came an hour later. This is progress. But you're right to be cautious. Now is the time to formalize boundaries. Formalize. That night, Elaine showed up again. I saw her car pull into the driveway and felt a tightening in my chest, but it passed quickly. I didn't open the door right away. I finished rinsing my plate, dried my hands, and walked to the door calmly. She was standing there, with her arms crossed, jaw set. You can't just freeze me out, she said as soon as I opened the door. I'm not freezing you out, I said. I'm pausing. That's not fair, she said. I've been worried sick. About me, I asked, or about losing control. Her eyes flashed. That's a cruel thing to say. It's an honest question, I said. She stepped inside without being invited. I let her. I wanted this to happen on my terms, not hers. You've gone behind my back, she said. Lawyers, banks, agencies. You're making me look like some kind of manipulator. I didn't create this situation, I said. I responded to it. You're acting like I did something wrong, she said. I looked at her then, really looked. The familiar face, the sister I'd defended for years when people said she was overbearing, the woman who had stepped in seamlessly, decisively, whenever there was space to fill. I don't think you see what you're doing, I said. And that's part of the problem. She shook her head. You're not thinking clearly. There it was, not shouted, not dramatic, but final. I am, I said quietly, clearer than I've been in a long time. She stared at me, searching for something. Confusion, weakness, doubt. She didn't find it. You're going to regret pushing me away, she said. I'm not pushing you away, I said. I'm stepping forward. She left after that. slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. I didn't chase her. I stood there in the silence, heart steady, mind unusually calm. This was the point of no return. Not because I'd won anything, not because she'd lost, but because I finally understood something that had taken me decades to learn. Being seen as capable isn't about proving yourself over and over. It's about refusing to accept a story that doesn't belong to you. And from this point on, every decision I made would be guided by that understanding, no matter how uncomfortable it made the people who had grown used to speaking in my place. Monday morning, I made a list of phone calls. Not the kind of list you jot down on the back of an envelope and lose by lunchtime. This one went on a clean sheet of paper, written slowly, with space between each name. I wanted room to think. At the top of the list, I wrote primary care physician. I'd been seeing Dr. Patel for over a decade. He knew my history, my habits, my tendency to downplay pain and over-prepare for everything else. If anyone was going to speak to my mental state with credibility, it needed to be someone who had known me before this narrative existed. I called his office at 8:30 sharp. "Good morning, Dr. Patel's office," the receptionist said. "This is Margaret Hart," I said. "I need to schedule a comprehensive cognitive and functional evaluation as soon as possible." There was a pause. "Is something wrong?" "No," I said. "Something is being assumed." One? That got me an appointment 2 days later. The second call was to my insurance provider. I didn't ask questions this time. I made statements. "I'm revoking permission for any family member to discuss my care without my explicit, written consent," I said. "I want that noted in every file." The representative tried to soften it. "Of course. Just so you know, family members often are not authorized," I said. "Please read that back to me once you've entered it." She did. The third call was harder. I dialed Elaine's number, then hung up before it connected. I wasn't ready for that yet. This part required precision, not emotion. Instead, I called Rebecca. "We need to escalate," I said. "I agree," she replied. "I was hoping you'd say that." By noon, we had a plan. Not a dramatic one, not a scorched earth approach, just a clean, formal reset. Rebecca drafted letters, one to Adult Services, one to the medical group, one to my bank. Each letter stated the same thing in different language. I was competent. I was asserting my rights, and any further communication, initiated by third parties without my consent, was to be documented and disclosed to me immediately. She also prepared something else. A notice. Not a cease and desist, exactly, but close. It was addressed to Elaine. I read it 3 times before signing. It didn't accuse her of malice. It didn't threaten legal action. It simply stated that she was no longer authorized to act, speak, inquire, or represent me in any capacity related to my health, finances, or personal affairs. Seeing it in writing was strange, like watching a door close slowly, deliberately, with no intention of reopening. "Do you want me to send it?" Rebecca asked. "No," I said. "I will." That evening, I drove to the post office myself. The parking lot was nearly empty. I parked under a flickering light and sat in the car for a moment, envelope resting on the passenger seat. Elaine's name was typed neatly in the center, no return address. I thought about all the times she'd said she was just helping, all the times I'd let her. Then I walked inside and dropped it into the slot. On Wednesday, I sat in Dr. Patel's office while a nurse administered tests I'd once helped arrange for others. Memory recall, problem solving, pattern recognition, questions designed to catch hesitation, confusion, lapses. I answered calmly, accurately. When it was over, Dr. Patel folded his hands and looked at me. "You're fine," he said. "Not just fine, sharp." "I know," I said. He nodded. "Would you like me to document that formally?" "Yes," I said, "in detail." He smiled slightly. "I thought you might." By Friday, the letter arrived. Not from Elaine, from Adult Services. It was brief, carefully worded, but unmistakable. No further action indicated at this time. File to remain inactive unless new information arises. Inactive. That was the word I'd been waiting for. It didn't erase what had happened. It didn't undo the earlier notes. But it stopped momentum. And momentum is everything in situations like this. That night, Elaine called. I let it ring. Then I let it go to voicemail. She left a message this time. Her voice sounded different, tight, controlled. I got your letter, she said. I don't understand why you do this. After everything I've done for you. I deleted the message without replying. Saturday morning, I woke up later than usual. The house felt lighter, not peaceful, exactly, but quieter in a way that didn't feel tense. I made pancakes, something I hadn't done in years. I burned the first one, laughed out loud at myself, and scraped it into the trash. While the second one cooked, I stood at the stove and realized something important. Up until now, I'd been reacting to Elaine's moves, anticipating her next step, trying to stay one move ahead. But that was over. The system had acknowledged me. The professionals had heard my voice, not hers. That changed the balance. In the afternoon, I organized my files, not just the recent ones, everything. I labeled folders clearly: health, legal, financial, personal. I wrote a summary sheet for each, listing contents and key contacts. I made copies. I stored one set in a fireproof box. I gave another to Rebecca. This wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. That evening, there was a knock at the door. I knew it was Elaine before I opened it. She stood on the porch with her arms at her sides. No purse, no jacket, like she'd come unarmed. You didn't have to do this, she said. Yes, I said. I did. She shook her head. You've embarrassed me. I didn't mention your name to anyone, I said. You did that yourself. Teldin Mera. She looked past me into the house, as if searching for something familiar. You're acting like I'm dangerous, she said. No, I said. I'm acting like I'm in charge. That seemed to land. She swallowed. I was trying to protect you. I believe that, I said. But protection without consent is control. We stood there for a moment. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the porch. What happens now? She asked. Now, I said. We reset. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be as my sister. Not my guardian. Not my spokesperson. Not my contingency plan. And if I can't do that? She asked. Then we don't have one, I said. She nodded slowly. You've changed. Yes, I said. I have. She turned and walked back to her car. This time, she didn't slam the door. I closed mine gently. Inside, the house was quiet. The good kind. The kind that comes after something has been decided and doesn't need revisiting. For the first time in weeks, I sat down without a file or a list or a plan in front of me. I wasn't waiting for the next move, because I had already made mine. The meeting happened on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after adult services marked my file inactive. I hadn't planned it that way. In fact, I'd hoped it wouldn't happen at all. But when Elaine emailed asking if we could sit down like adults and clear the air, I knew avoiding it would only extend things. Closure, I'd learned, doesn't arrive on its own. Sometimes you have to let it in, briefly, and then show it back out. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our houses. Neutral territory, public enough to keep voices low, familiar enough that neither of us felt out of place. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table near the window. The barista recognized me and asked if I wanted my usual. I did. Black coffee, no sugar. I took the lid off immediately. I've never liked drinking through plastic. Elaine arrived exactly on time. She looked tired. Not disheveled, not unkempt. Just worn at the edges. Her hair was pulled back tighter than usual. She wore a cardigan she'd owned for years, the sleeves frayed at the cuffs. She ordered tea and sat down across from me without smiling. For a moment, we just looked at each other. I realized then that this was the first time in weeks we were seeing each other without a script already written. I don't know where to start, she said. That's okay, I replied. I do. She blinked. Of course you do. I didn't rise to it. I folded my hands on the table, the way I used to during performance reviews. Calm posture, open stance, no crossed arms. I want to be very clear, I said. I'm not here to argue about motives. I don't need you to agree with me. I just need you to understand the boundaries. She sighed. You've made those very clear already. Yes, I said, and I'm reinforcing them. Her jaw tightened. You went to a lawyer. You involved agencies. You made me look like I was trying to take over your life. End quote. I didn't make you look like anything, I said. I corrected records that were inaccurate. They weren't inaccurate, she said quickly. They were cautious. They were incomplete, I said. And they were initiated without my consent. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms now. You're acting like I had some master plan. I don't think you planned harm, I said. But you planned control. Her eyes flashed. That's not fair. I'm not asking for fairness, I said. I'm stating impact. She shook her head. You're rewriting everything. I was worried about you. Anyone would be. Anyone, I said, would have talked to me first. That's not true, she snapped. People in decline don't see it. I didn't interrupt her. That silence unsettled her more than an argument would have. You live alone, she continued. You don't have kids nearby. What was I supposed to do, just wait until something happened? Yes, I said. She laughed, sharp and humorless. That's irresponsible. No, I said. That's autonomy. She leaned forward. You're acting like you're immune to aging. I'm acting like I get to age on my own terms, I said. Her voice dropped. You don't understand how scary it is, watching someone you love slip. I understand fear, I said. I don't accept fear as justification. She stared at me, really stared, as if she were trying to find a crack. You didn't even tell me about the evaluation, she said. I heard from someone else. That was intentional, I said. Her lips pressed together. So you don't trust me anymore. I trust you to do what you think is right, I said. I don't trust that your definition of right includes my consent. The barista walked by and refilled our cups without asking. The coffee steamed between us, untouched. You've changed, Elaine said again. I've stopped accommodating, I replied. There's a difference. She sat back, eyes drifting to the window. Outside, a man struggled to fit a large box into the back seat of a sedan. He slammed the door twice before it finally closed. You didn't have to humiliate me, she said quietly. I didn't speak about you to anyone except my attorney, I said. If you feel exposed, it's because your actions were visible once I stopped covering them. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her teacup. She set it down without drinking. What do you want from me? She asked. The question surprised me, not because she asked it, but because she sounded genuinely unsure. I want you to stop, I said. Completely. No calls, no inquiries, no conversations about me that don't include me. And if I'm worried? She asked. Then you ask me, I said. And you accept my answer. She frowned. What if I think you're wrong? Then you live with that discomfort, I said. Just like I've lived with mine. The words hung there, heavier than I'd intended. Elaine looked down at her hands. You always were good at this, she said softly. Making things sound so final. I learned it at work, I said, from watching what happens when people don't. She nodded slowly. You know, people are talking. I'm aware, I said. They think you overreacted. I'm comfortable with that, I said. She looked up sharply. You don't care? I care about the truth, I said, not the consensus. She studied me for a long moment, then exhaled. So that's it. That's it, I said. No going back, she said. Not to how things were, I said. That version relied on my silence. Her eyes filled not with tears, but with something like resignation. I never thought you'd push back like this, she said. I never thought I'd need to, I replied. We sat there a little longer, neither of us speaking. When Elaine finally stood, she hesitated. "If I give you space," she said, "will you let me back in?" "I'm not locking a door," I said. "I'm setting conditions." "After one," she nodded once. "Okay." She walked away without looking back. I stayed where I was, watching her reflection disappear in the glass. I felt no triumph, no relief, just a steady sense of alignment, like something in me had finally settled into the position it was meant to hold all along. This conversation hadn't changed Elaine. That was never the point. It had changed the balance, and sometimes that's the most you can hope for. I made the decision 3 days after the meeting at the coffee shop, not in a rush, not in a surge of emotion. It came to me the way some truths do, quietly, while I was doing something else entirely. I was standing in line at the pharmacy, waiting to pick up a refill I'd been on for years. The woman ahead of me was arguing about her insurance. The pharmacist kept apologizing, tapping at the keyboard, repeating the same phrases in a patient voice. I watched the exchange with detached familiarity. I'd mediated enough conflicts like that to recognize the shape of it. The woman wasn't angry about the copay. She was angry about not being in control. That's when it clicked. All of this, Elaine, the agencies, the records, the quiet panic people seemed to feel around aging. It wasn't just about who spoke for me. It was about who held the steering wheel. And everyone assumed it had to be someone. I drove home thinking about that. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the car with the engine off, hands resting on the wheel, and looked at my house. The same house I'd defended, documented, protected. The house that had become proof of my competence simply by continuing to exist under my care. I realized then that I was still playing the same game, just better than Elaine. I had proven I was capable. I had corrected the record. I had asserted my rights. All of that mattered. But it also kept me locked in a posture of defense, constantly ready to demonstrate something to someone. I didn't want that. I wanted out. That night, I pulled out a legal pad and started a new list. Not phone calls this time. Not institutions. Options. Not for how to win. For how to step aside without losing myself. The next morning, I called Rebecca. "I want to make a structural change," I said. "Not because I have to, because I choose to." She was quiet for a moment. "Tell me what you're thinking." "I don't want to be the center of a contingency plan anymore," I said. "I don't want anyone waiting for me to fail so they can step in." "Okay," she said slowly. "What does that look like?" "It looks like removing the prize," I said. We talked for over an hour, about trusts, about independent fiduciaries, about what it meant to relinquish authority without relinquishing agency. Rebecca didn't try to talk me out of it. She asked questions, good ones. By the end of the call, my hand was aching from writing notes, but my chest felt lighter. On Thursday, I went back to her office. This time, we didn't talk about Elaine at all. We talked about me. My assets weren't extraordinary. A paid-off house, retirement savings, a modest investment account, enough to be comfortable, not enough to be powerful in the way people imagine power. Still, they had been enough to make me a target for management. "I want to place everything into an irrevocable trust," I said. "Managed by a third party. No family, no exceptions." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "You understand what that means?" "Yes," I said. "It means I can't be pressured over it anymore." "And you'll be giving up control," she said. "I'm giving up leverage," I corrected. "There's a difference." She smiled then. Not a professional smile, a personal one. We set the wheels in motion. The process took weeks. Paperwork, signatures, verifications, meetings with a trustee I'd never met before, who had no interest in my family dynamics and no patience for speculation. He asked me what I wanted my money to do. "Nothing dramatic," I said. "Just what it's been doing. Sustain my life, pay my bills, keep things boring." He nodded. "We're very good at boring." I also did something else. I sold my house. Not in a hurry. Not at a loss. I listed it with a local agent and accepted a reasonable offer from a young couple expecting their first child. They loved the backyard, the kitchen, the light in the afternoons. I didn't tell Elaine until after the papers were signed. She called me, voice sharp with disbelief. "You sold the house?" "Yes," I said. "Why would you do that?" she demanded. "That was your anchor." "No," I said. "It was my shield. I don't need it anymore." "You didn't talk to me about this," she said. "I know," I replied. She accused me of being reckless, of overcorrecting, of punishing her. I let her talk. When she finished, I said, "I'm not punishing you. I'm exiting a system that requires someone to be in charge of me. That's not how life works," she snapped. "It is for me," I said. I moved into a small, well-run, independent living community across town. Not a facility, an apartment complex with services available if you want them and invisible if you don't. No one checked on me unless I asked. No one asked for my sister's phone number. The first night there, I slept better than I had in months. Elaine came by once, unannounced. She stood in the parking lot, looking up at the building like it had personally offended her. "This isn't what I meant," she said. "You weren't supposed to disappear." "I didn't disappear," I said. "I removed the role you were reacting to." "It's odd." She looked around, at the other residents coming and going, living their quiet, ordinary lives. "So, what am I supposed to do now?" she asked. "That's not my problem to solve," I said gently. The truth was, she had lost interest once there was nothing left to manage. No house, no accounts, no authority to negotiate, no leverage. Weeks passed, then months. People stopped calling. The concern evaporated. Without assets or control to contest, there was no narrative to maintain. I still had my life, my routines, my choices, but no one was circling them anymore. One afternoon, sitting on the balcony of my new apartment, I realized something else. I hadn't won. That was the wrong frame entirely. I had opted out of proving, of defending, of being evaluated through someone else's fear. The twist wasn't that I took power back. It was that I let it go. And in doing so, I finally understood something I hadn't before. True autonomy doesn't come from holding everything tightly. It comes from knowing exactly what you're willing to release and doing it on your own terms. The quiet that followed wasn't immediate. For the first few weeks after the move, my phone still buzzed more than I expected. Numbers I didn't recognize. Messages that began politely and ended awkwardly. A former neighbor asking if I was doing okay. A distant cousin Elaine hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly concerned. A woman from church I hadn't seen since Easter, suggesting lunch. Concern has a long echo. I didn't answer most of it. Not out of bitterness, out of exhaustion. Every explanation felt like reopening a door I'd already closed. Instead, I focused on learning the rhythms of my new place. The apartment wasn't fancy. One bedroom, a small kitchen with appliances that hummed instead of roared, a balcony just big enough for 2 chairs and a potted plant. The hallways smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee, depending on the time of day. No one knocked unless they were invited. That took some getting used to. The first morning I woke up there, I lay in bed listening for sounds I didn't recognize. Footsteps in the hall, an elevator ding, a door closing down the corridor, all of it distant. None of it aimed at me. I made coffee and stood at the window while it brewed, watching the parking lot slowly fill. People came and went. Some walked with canes, some didn't, some waved to each other, some kept to themselves. No one was being monitored. That was the strangest part. Not the downsizing, not the boxes, the absence of attention. For years, I'd lived under a low-grade expectation that someone might check on me, question me, evaluate me. I hadn't noticed how heavy that expectation was until it was gone. Elaine didn't come back. She texted once, about a month in. Just a single line. "I hope you're happy." I stared at the message longer than I should have. I wanted to respond, to say yes or no, or it's complicated, to soften the edge of it, to offer something that might ease her discomfort. Then I put the phone down. I wasn't obligated to make sense of my choices for her. The world adjusted quickly. Without a house to reference, without accounts to ask about, without decisions to contest, the conversation around me dried up. People stopped speculating. Agencies stopped calling. Even Elaine seemed to lose momentum. I realized then how much of her concern had been fueled by proximity to things that could be managed. Once those things were gone, so was the urgency. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted her attention, but because it clarified what had actually mattered. One afternoon, I ran into Carol at the grocery store. She looked surprised to see me. "You moved fast," she said, pushing her cart aside so we could talk. "I moved deliberately," I replied. She smiled. "You seem lighter." "I feel less explained," I said. She laughed, not entirely sure what I meant, but accepting it anyway. We talked about small things: weather, her dog, the bakery that had closed on Main Street. When we parted, she hugged me and said, "I'm glad you're okay." I knew what she meant. She meant I wasn't broken. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, I thought about the version of myself I'd been trying to defend all those months. The capable one, the sharp one, the woman who could pass tests and recite dates and keep her accounts balanced. I had proven all of that, and it hadn't brought peace. Peace came later, in the letting go, in the acceptance that I didn't need to perform competence for anyone, that I didn't need to stay in a place just to demonstrate I could manage it, that my worth wasn't tied to how much control I retained. Some days, the grief surprised me. I'd catch myself reaching for the phone to call Elaine, to tell her something mundane, a funny sign I'd seen, a recipe I'd tried, a thought that reminded me of our father. Then I'd remember, and I'd sit with the silence instead. It wasn't punishment. It was consequence. Not for her, for the dynamic we'd built together. I joined a book club at the community center. Mostly women, a few men. Conversations that wandered and looped and didn't need conclusions. No one asked about my past. They took me at face value. On Thursdays, I volunteered at the library, 2 hours shelving books and helping kids find the right section. The librarian trusted me with the keys to the supply closet without hesitation. That trust felt different. It wasn't inherited. It wasn't assumed. It wasn't conditional. It was offered in the present. One evening, sitting on my balcony as the sun went down, I thought about the file that still existed somewhere, the notes, the concerns, the earlier version of me that had been quietly questioned. It didn't bother me the way it once had. Records exist, so do people. And sometimes the only way to live freely is to step outside the story others are trying to finish for you. I hadn't reconciled with Elaine. I didn't know if I ever would. But I had reconciled with myself, with the fact that independence doesn't always look like standing your ground. Sometimes it looks like walking away calmly, intentionally, before the ground beneath you becomes something you're expected to defend. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was spacious, and for the first time in a long while, it belonged entirely to me. The morning I realized the story was finished, nothing unusual happened. No phone call, no letter, no sudden wave of clarity. I woke up at my usual time, made coffee, and sat at the small table by the window while the day arranged itself outside. A delivery truck idled for too long. Someone on the third floor laughed, loud and unself-conscious. The elevator chimed. Life, moving without reference to me. That was the point. I had spent months inside a narrative that demanded resolution. Who was right? Who had crossed a line? Who would be believed in the end? Somewhere along the way, I had mistaken closure for victory. But closure, I learned, doesn't announce itself. It just stops asking for your attention. After breakfast, I walked down to the community garden. I hadn't planned to. I just found myself there, standing at the edge of the raised beds, watching a woman I didn't know kneel in the dirt with a patience I admired. She looked up and smiled, like my presence didn't require explanation. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I replied. I picked a pair of gloves from the shared bin and joined her without another word. We worked side by side, loosening soil, pulling weeds, talking about nothing in particular. Tomatoes, weather, how hard it was to remember to water at the right time. She didn't ask where I was from, or why I'd moved, or who I used to be. She accepted who I was that morning, kneeling in the dirt, hands dirty, mind clear. Later, back in my apartment, I opened the last box I hadn't unpacked. It held photographs, not the curated ones, not the ones you frame, the ordinary ones. Blurry holidays, half smiles, people cut off at the edges, my husband holding a fish he was proud of, Elaine and me at a county fair, arms slung around each other, sunburned and laughing. I sat on the floor and went through them slowly. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel regret. I felt a kind of tenderness that surprised me. For the woman I had been, for the woman Elaine had been too, for the way we had once fit together, before fear taught us different roles. I put the photos back in the box and slid it onto the shelf. Not hidden, just stored. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. But something in me had softened enough to answer. "Margaret Hart," I said. "Ms. Hart, this is Franklin County Adult Services," the voice said. "I'm just calling to confirm that no further contact is required on our end. We're closing the loop." "Closing the loop?" "Yes," I said. "That's correct. Thank you for your time," the voice replied. The call ended. I didn't sit down afterward. I didn't need to. The loop wasn't closed because they said it was. It had closed when I stopped orbiting it. That evening, I went to dinner with 2 women from the book club. We talked about the novel we'd read, then drifted into other subjects. Childhood memories, things we'd done badly on purpose, things we'd done well by accident. At one point, one of them asked, "So what did you do before you moved here?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, because I realized I didn't need it. "I worked in HR," I said. "I retired." That was enough. No explanation, no defense, no context, just a fact, released and allowed to land. When I got home, I stood on the balcony and watched the lights come on across the parking lot, windows glowing, televisions flickering, lives being lived without commentary. I thought about Elaine then, not with longing, not with bitterness, just with clarity. I hoped she would find something to manage that didn't require diminishing someone else. I hoped she would learn, in her own time, that control isn't the same as care. But that was her work, not mine. The story that had once felt so urgent, so consuming, had narrowed itself down to a single, quiet truth. I hadn't reclaimed my power. I had relinquished the need to prove I deserved it. And in doing so, I had stepped out of a moral trap that catches so many people as they age. The belief that dignity must be defended, argued for, justified. It doesn't. Dignity is not something you win. It's something you stop negotiating. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no rehearsals, no conversations running in circles, just rest. The next morning, I woke with the same light filtering through the curtains, the same sounds in the hall. I made coffee. I sat down. I opened a book. The world did not collapse. No one intervened. No one checked. Nothing was demanded of me. And for the first time since all of this began, I understood what justice looked like in my own life. Not exposure, not punishment, not reconciliation, just the quiet, unremarkable freedom of being left alone to live exactly as I choose. Nothing more, nothing less. And that, finally, was enough.